The removal of the threat through hand washing, for example, leads to a restoration of the anterior cingulate activity. And this will result in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex calming down and the cessation of the behavior. Now, in OCD, this dorsal anterior cingulate cortex remains pathologically active despite the removal of the threat. The anterior cingulate cortex is part of an extended network which has connections to the prefrontal cortex and also the amygdala. It plays an important role overall in the emotional appraisal of situations that we encounter. It also plays an important role in emotion-related learning. Let's see how this works and how your brain's working in a normal scenario. And then we'll try to connect that to someone with obsessive-compulsive disorder. So let's say a person is exposed to an aversive stimulus, say dirt. The amygdala and the ventral striatum are activated and they produce feelings of displeasure and aversion. They send signals to the frontal cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this front part of the brain coordinates an avoidance response. The connections from the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, to the anterior cingulate cortex will basically put a value judgment or an affect on this particular experience. So the experience of being aversive, the anxiety, the negative affect, and it will help in that learning. The dorsal part of the anterior cingulate cortex then will generate a control signal to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the supplementary motor area now to promote behaviors to remove the threat. So because it was dirt, it'll coordinate a behavior to go, say, wash one's hands. The removal of the threat through hand washing, for example, leads to a restoration of the anterior cingulate activity. And this will result in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex calming down and the cessation of the behavior. Because there are connections from the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex to the amygdala as well, the amygdala also will not experience or will not generate the response of fear or uncertainty or anxiety, which basically means it'll achieve fear extinction. Now, in OCD, this dorsal anterior cingulate cortex remains pathologically active despite the removal of the threat, potentially because of persistent activity in other regions such as the orbitofrontal cortex or the striatum, whereby that direct excitatory pathway is hyperactive.